If we want to make our drawings pop, then we need to have a drawing to start with. Here's one I prepared earlier. In fact, here's one that I drew yesterday for my video on how to draw grand architecture freehand. So if you're interested in how I think and plan and plot to draw a building such as this directly in pen, freehand, you can watch that. But when I drew this, I didn't do any line work for hatching because I feel that drawings of ornate architecture, particularly on a smaller scale such as this, end up with so many lines that to add even more with hatching is to risk creating a visual confusion of lines. But then without any indication of shade, it can then flatten the three-dimensional reality of the building. So in this case, using marker tone can be a great way to pop our building back from looking more two-dimensional into looking three-dimensional again. For this video, I'm going to be using Copic sketch marker pens. They come with a chisel end and a brush end, and I'll be using the brush end. And in my drawings, I use a range of N0 to N6. N is the code for their neutral grey colour, and 0 is the lightest tone, and 6 is the heaviest tone that I use. And here's our reference photo, so we can see just how much the tone really pops various parts of the architecture out and also creates a sense of three dimensions. The important thing with value is not so much what a particular value is, but the contrast between that value and the value next to it. So what we want to do when we add tonal values to our drawing is to add them in a way that we create contrasts, highlights, because that will create the most visual excitement in our scene. Another way of looking at this is that we want to try and avoid having too many mid-tones, which will just all tend to look the same. We want to have light tones next to dark tones wherever possible. And I also find it helpful to have what I call my color chart, even though it's not very colorful, within view when I draw. It helps me to choose the most appropriate tone more easily. Now, these are ink, which obviously means we can't erase them or remove them in any way. So I find it's most helpful to start relatively light in terms of the choices of tone I use, while I work out exactly what I'm going to do. So for instance, I want these lightest areas to actually be so white that I leave them white with the paper. So for instance, these columns and this section here and this column here at least. Or am I going to put at the very least N0 on all of the building and then go darker in certain parts? What I'll probably do is experiment a little with this section, starting off leaving the columns white, or at least parts of the column white, and then working at the tones around. Time to start. And if you'd like to have a go at doing this yourself, I'm going to post this line drawing onto my channel community page, and you can print a copy off and have a go playing with the tone yourself, and you'll find the reference photo posted before it for the previous video. Let's start. I'll try and remember to tell you what pen I'm using, at least in the first half of this. So I'm going to start with an N0 because I want to get a feel for how this looks and just to work out potentially what I'm going to leave white. The other thing is, of course, I'm not a slave to my reference. If by adjusting things slightly gives me a better looking drawing, then I won't hesitate to do that. So now I'm switching to an N1. And here's some N2. Now I'm going to use a 3 just up here and in here to represent the darkest tones that I'm using at the moment. And I think I'm going to try a 4 just for this bit of shadow up here. Alright, so now I've got a sense of what I'm doing. I'm putting tone on most of the building, but a lot of it will just be this N0 very lightly. A 0.1. Using a 0.3 under here right now, although I am expecting to switch this to a 4 later, but sometimes, as I said, it's good to just go a bit lighter as we work out our values and adjust them. I'm doing this 2 at the moment, but I expect this will probably go, at least some of this go darker. Oops, now I've just used a 2 here when that should have been a 0, so that can happen. And there's nothing we can do except to not worry about it. Except, because I said tonal values are relative, by putting a darker tone next to it, I can make it look a little bit lighter. There we go, and now it's not looking so bad. And I'm going to do a second coat of N2 over this. Multiple coats doesn't make a huge difference, but it does make, I think, a noticeable difference. And I don't know that I'm going to put the 4 anywhere. Just give a little more shadow in here, and maybe in there too. I'll use the 3 for this. Other thing to remember about these markers is that the Copic brand, at least, they dry a little bit lighter than how they look when we first put them on. A 1 there, then a bit more 0 here. And now we get some light just playing off that curve there, which works nicely. So that's a 1, so I'll use a 2 to get a bit darker in here. And again, we'll use the 3 just for a dash of darker up here and in here. Back to 2. And again on these columns, I'll just use a very light touch to put a bit of shade on the center of the column. Maybe I should do that in 3. The other thing that's relevant with tone is when we're trying to create a sense of distance, is that our values lighten as they move further away. So I do want my darkest tones, whether they're N1, N2, N4, N10, I want my darkest tones to be up in this closest section, and I want down here to be using 1 or 2 tones less than what I would have used if this same detail had been catching the light the same way up here. This is an N3. All right, there's a bit of shadow in here. In fact, the shadow on the building is quite diffuse because this photo was taken on a cloudy day and I have lightened it slightly as well. So we're not getting strong shadows that particularly show the direction of the sun. So we're actually more creating the contrast in shadows that we want to make the building look the way we want it to look. All right, so now I'm going back to my N0. Now I talked about going lighter as we go down here, which may mean that I leave these columns completely white and maybe even a few details white that I used an N0 for further up here. It's a case of trying it out, looking to see how it looks, and if we're happy with it, leaving it, and if we don't think it works as well as we hoped, making adjustments. So now it's time to consider these trees and shrubs, which are darker, but again, I'm going to do my principle of going a bit lighter. Start with a 4 for one or two of them, and then see how that looks. Now, of course, I'm not limited to simply colouring in with these markers. I can do little dots and dashes as if they were pens, and particularly with something such as a tree, that can be very helpful for adding additional realism to create additional texture top of our line work, or in addition to our line work. And I'm going to a 3. Back to the 4. And I'm going to put this 0 down here, really just to help define that this is the end of the building, because I have left this with no tone on it. It creates a separation then. I'll just use my 0 for a little bit of work down here and under there. So now we come to this roof section. Now the domes have what we call local colour. It means that they're simply a different colour to the other things. For the moment, I'm just going to do the top of this dome, all in N0. And I'm going to do the same with this dome as well. Now with a 1, I start to work out where am I going to want to make it a bit darker. Now the dome is further away in the same way that this end is further away, so I want to go a bit lighter generally than what I've used for closer sections. And I might just use a little more 0 just to get, if you like, a half tone change of value there. Maybe just use a 2. So it's all about creating the contrast that we want, where the contrast helps to reinforce what's happening in a three-dimensional sense. So how is this looking? I might just add a little tone to the base here. I think we just need to add a little stronger value down here. And I think that does work better. Yes, that helps the ground just sit down a little bit and lets the building rise above it. Well, I can't show you the drawing again, and I've just realized I can show you a side-by-side comparison with the line drawing and the line drawing plus tone, because I can print off a photo of the line drawing. It's printed with a heavier line than is in the picture, but we can see the effect of actually putting tonal values onto our drawing, both for the local color, but more particularly for the three-dimensional effects of shade and shadow. And I'll post this on my community page if you'd like to have a go playing with tonal values yourself. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Don't just hit subscribe, hit notifications, and then you'll know when I've posted a new video. Or have a look at the 270 odd videos that I've already posted that explore so many different aspects of both drawing, but also of being an artist. Carefully applied tone can really make architecture pop into 3 dimensions. I've used a range of 5 different tonal values here. And remember, the key thing is not so much what tone I'm using for a particular object, but it's the relative value of that tone in relation to the tones around it that will create the effect we want or not create the effect we want. And the challenge is to avoid too many mid-tonal values too close together over too much of our drawing. Whatever you're drawing and however you're drawing it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.